feedback. If I went for a job interview and I didn't get the job, I wasn't interested in feedback. I wasn't interested in people's justification for not giving me the job when I knew I was the best person for that job. And to a certain extent, and that's not being arrogant, that is being me. That is being wedded to my idea that I can do anything I've set my mind to.
This amazing platform, this amazing role did not come to me sat at home gazing. It came to me because I got into action. I believed that I was, and I believe that I am, the best person to do this role. Because I was just as qualified, just as capable, able as anybody else who'd stepped into this space before. When I was asked a question at Hustings and I was one of 4, and I was asked the question, if you are successfully elected as Deputy Vice President, how will you promote equality, diversity and inclusion? And thinking about it, my answer was,
I, Stephanie Boyce. Stephanie Boyce is the current head of the Law Society, which is an independent body that governs all solicitors across England and Wales. In its entire history, she is the 177th president, yet she's only the first person of colour and only the 6th ever female president of the Law Society. In today's interview, we spoke about her journey from being born in a single-parent household on a council estate and how she's managed to elevate to the position that she's in now. And you really, really get a sense of her determination, her hard work, her grit, her work ethic that have landed her to the position that she's in now. So, without further ado, this is 1000 Voices, in here we have I, Stephanie Boyce. Great. Hi there, Stephanie. Thank you so much for coming to 1000 Voices. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Great, good to hear. And so I came across your profile when I was doing some research, and I'm not necessarily in the legal profession or in that field myself, but I was very, very inspired by what you've managed to do, and I thought it would be great to get you on board for you to share your journey, share your lessons learned, and I'm sure that our community of listeners are going to find your journey as inspiring as I found it. So, to begin with, do you mind just talking a bit about your upbringing? Where you grew up and what it was like.
Well, absolutely. Can I say, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me to speak with 1000 Voices. Um, uh, so my life journey began in Aylesbury, Buckinghamshire. And Aylesbury, for me, is a place where I would come back to time and time again. So for me, Aylesbury in the 1970s, when I was growing up there, was a small, sleepy market town, with little ethnic diversity compared to the town that it is today. And I still, or up until last year, I still lived in Aylesbury. I've since moved out of Aylesbury, but not a million miles away. But my journey began, I grew up with the sounds of injustices ringing in my ears as I could see, events globally, domestically, evolving around the world. People struggling to exercise their rights, people having little or no rights. And that's what inspired me to become a legal professional, a solicitor. But looking back, my grandfather was the first to come to the United Kingdom in the early 1960s, and he came in search of, faith, hope, and greater opportunities. He'd be followed by my grandmother, and he'd be followed by his children, one of whom was my mother, and they would come as my grandfather could afford to send for them, as the term, the colloquial term, to send for the kids. And there was a space of 5 years. 5 years between my mother coming behind her mother, and then another 5 years between my uncles following my mother and her siblings. And mother came to the United Kingdom in 1967 from St. Vincent in the Caribbean to join my grandparents. And my father, who she would meet in the early 1970s on the streets of Aylesbury. Aylesbury's got a lot to answer for, Temin. But he came from Barbados in 1964. And again, very much the same, in search of a better life. And to honour those responsibilities that certainly my father had, still in Barbados. But as I said, living in Aylesbury for a number of years, as I did, and at the age of 12, we emigrated to America after my parents had parted company at the age of 4. So I grew up in a single parent household on a council estate, in a low socioeconomic position. But I always had a dream, and that dream was to become, as I say, a lawyer, to really help the voiceless, as I could see it then, to speak, to hear their voice.
That's very interesting. And you said something very interesting in your intro there just now when you said that you were born in the 1970s. I think you termed it as the sounds to the sounds of injustice. Um, could you speak? Was you aware of that when you was growing up, or is that something you came to realize later on, looking back retrospectively?
I think a bit of both. I grew up in a household where very much, when I look back now, the West Indian household was very much, it was a gathering point. Even when I think about those house parties, when my mother had a few of those, not many, but all the furniture would get cleared out of the living room. The sound system would move in. But our home on a Sunday was the focal point for family, for friends. And mother's door, even though we didn't have much, was always open. It was somewhere that people could come and exchange their stories of home, reminisce, listening on the radio, trying to get that. There was a chap on a Sunday, I think, round about 4 o'clock, who used to play, reggae music, because we didn't have that on TV, very much. We had, I think, 3 channels up until I think 1984, when we got Channel 4. So to hear reggae music, living in rural Buckinghamshire as it was then, we didn't have the food. There wasn't that you couldn't pop down to the supermarket and buy some saltfish or, or jerk seasoning or any of that. You had to go to London or another city, Birmingham or so forth. And that was done every so often. And normally somebody was going and family would say, can you bring me back this? But this chap on the radio on a Sunday, we'd all gather around the radio listening to those reggae tunes. And he had this lovely, deep, soulful voice. But as a child, kind of being on the peripherals, listening to those conversations, I heard about why people had left home to come to Britain. I heard about the events that were unfolding, in this country as well, around, the miners' strike, having to shut the curtains, turn the lights off at a certain time. I heard about, boycotts of countries, sporting boycotts of countries who perhaps were not, immersing themselves in equality and justice, for their citizens. And I think that's what absolutely pipped my interest.
Perfect. As you're speaking there, I can, even though I wasn't in the house, I feel like I'm reminiscing myself, dancing around the house, listening to some reggae music as well. But that's perfect. Thank you for that. So you've gone to the US, you've come back. What happened after that? By then, I suppose you said you wanted to become a lawyer. By then, I suppose you knew you wanted. By then, I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to get into law. How did you go from there into your first trainee, position as a trainee?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. As I said, the US would have a lasting impression upon me. I hadn't known poverty like that. I hadn't known injustices like what I saw there. So I would live there for 6 years. I'd graduate from high school, and a few days or so after graduating from high school in 1991, I was back here in the United Kingdom because this is where I wanted to study. This is where I wanted to qualify. But I didn't have, and we didn't have the internet. Now, today I was Googling how to bleed the radiator. The internet was not as prevalent as it is today. One couldn't Google, where do I find to go to get a loan funding to do, to qualify as a solicitor or to do, as it is now, the solicitor's qualifying exam, but of course it was the legal practice course before that. So, and I didn't have those networks, those family networks, those social networks to be able to ask those questions. They weren't there for me. So I've basically had to guess my way and find my way through lots of things. I applied to university, but I couldn't get into university because my American qualification at that time was not recognised. So I had to go back and do an access to higher qualification. And through speaking to people, I then got to learn different things. And I did that part time for 2 years. And when I finished doing that, I then went on to apply to university, and I started off part time whilst working at British Rail. And I thought, why am I doing this part time? This is what I want to do. This is what I'm destined to do. So I then enrolled full time in London at London Guildhall University to study law full time. And in September 1996, sorry, I packed up my worldly goods in my car and I headed to Mile End to take up my life as a full time student and to begin my 3-year course. I had secured, I did get a grant a maintenance grant from the local authority. I did go at a time where I did not have to pay tuition fees. So I recognise that I was privileged in that respect, compared to today, where you have to pay tuition fees, where students are being asked to study in the current climate as the pandemic as it is now, and that they have to support themselves if they don't come from a family that's able to do that for them. So I recognised that I had a lift up, and subsequently was able to go on to borrow a large loan from a bank to complete the legal practice course. And I remember people saying to me when I had come out of law school, people saying to me, your loan, your debt is more than my mortgage, and maybe not the same today, but I would suspect that actually that's still quite true for many people. That the debt they amass from going to university, going to law school to qualify as a solicitor or a lawyer is bigger than some people's mortgages. But I had a dream and a burning desire, burning passion to become a solicitor, and I was just determined to succeed. Nothing was going to get in my way.
I was going to touch on that because you seem like you were very, very determined growing up. I mean, for most people, a lot of people, if they were to, you've come back from the US and then you've been told, okay, my qualification isn't going to work. You need to work for an extra 2 years part time and then apply again. That's like, it's a major setback. And it would make sense if somebody was to hear that and be like, okay, let me explore a different path. But you knew what you wanted and you went for it. Would you attribute that determined kind of, I don't know what you call it, that doggedness, the attitude to your upbringing, or where did that come from?
Well, absolutely. I was brought up in a household where, we were told that we could be anything, that you don't give up, and I still hold true. I still hold on to those ideas today that, and perhaps later we'll talk about the 4 attempts it took me to be elected as deputy vice president to go on to become president as I am today. But there is something, if you want something bad enough, if you have a dream, a desire, and it's keeping you awake at night, it's all you can think about, you've got to go for it. I once heard somebody say, if you don't give your dream birth, if you don't give it life, you'll be busy watching somebody else on, all those other social media platforms doing it ahead of you. And the other thing that I didn't do is, and I'm not advocating that people should do this, because I think people have to get to a point that they do everything that's right for them. But I absolutely believe if you are on a road, if you are on a path, and that path that, if you're traveling down a road and that road is not working out for you, right? You get off of that road and you try a different one, but I'm absolutely wedded to the idea that every delay, every detour, every obstacle has got me to where I am today. And I'm absolutely grateful to the people who said no to me in my life, because I'm here, because of them. I don't and didn't take feedback. If I went for a job interview and I didn't get the job, I wasn't interested in feedback. I wasn't interested in people's justification for not giving me the job when I knew I was the best person for that job. And to a certain extent, and that's not being arrogant, that is being me. That is being wedded to my idea that I can do anything I've set my mind to.
That's perfect. Okay, do you remember? So you've finished your university course now. Do you remember your first position, your first position as a trainee, what that was like, and any challenges that you had at that point in time?
Well, again, I was absolutely blessed. So what happened was I think, so basically, I went to university, and in my second year, because I didn't have those connections, as I said, I didn't know, that I was supposed to, apply to the legal practice course when I was supposed to do that, get a training contract, none of that. I turned up to law school with no training contract. Again, not so dissimilar to others, but quite a few people already had those training contracts. But what happened is that I came across an organisation called the Windsor Fellowship, and I got a period of work experience. I was able to go and undertake work experience at the then Lord Chancellor's Department, um, and I was able to travel to the House of Commons with Jeff Hoon, who was the gosh, he was a permanent uh, undersecretary, I think, at that time. But I was able to travel with him to the House of Commons and see and sit and see how those things worked. But equally, I guess that was, a bit of my taste for legislation, for lawmaking, really in action. Um, and then I started to understand that I had to apply for a training contract. I came home one Easter. My father said to me, "Have you got a training contract?" And by that time, Tevin, I had applied to, it seemed like 400 and something places. It probably was only 100, 150, maybe a bit less, but it seemed like a lot. And in those days, it wasn't an email, it was pen and paper, or I used to type it,
Oh wow.
you know. And you, yeah, and you literally went to the post box, put it in the post box, and sent it. None of this online filling form, or if it was there, I wasn't aware of it. And I came home one Easter. My father said to me, "Have you got a training contract?" And I said no. And I told him, whatever. And he said, "Give me what you've got." And my father worked at the local magistrates court at that time. And he began to hand out my application, CV, whatever it was. Um, and I subsequently got a call from a firm located in Aylesbury, less than a 10-minute walk away from where I was living with my grandfather at that time. And I was invited to go in for an interview. And it turned out that the young lady who had the training contract, who had secured the training contract 2 years in advance, her husband had now got a job and was being relocated. So it meant she could no longer take up that training contract. So here was this training contract now being presented in my lap. Obviously, I had to go through an interview, but when I got there, it turned out that I had been to the same law school as Mr. Richard Keithley, who interviewed me, who was then the senior partner, the principal at Horwood and James Solicitors in Aylesbury. And we had so much in common. He gave me gave me the training contract, and I'm forever grateful to Mr. Richard Keithley for giving me that opportunity.
That's perfect. And at that position in time, did you know that you wanted to become the president of the Law Society? Was that something you learned, later on in your career? And what was that trajectory like from that first position as a trainee to the where you are now, the president of the Law Society?
No, so I was a trainee from 2000 till 2002. I left that position as a trainee because I wanted to become a litigator, but that was at a time of the conveyancing boom. There wasn't many litigation roles around. So I went and I was doing people's gardens, until I got my first post qualification job in Huntingdon as a litigator. And then I was made redundant twice in as many years. Then in 2004, I decided it. I'm going in-house. I got my first in-house role with the General Counsel of the Bar. I got involved with the Law Society around about that time for the first time in 2004, and again in 2008. And in 2013, I was elected onto council. And by about 2015, I'm not sure when I made up my mind, Tevin, But in 2015, I put myself forward for the first time. And 4 times later, I was successfully elected as Deputy Vice President. And of course, once you're elected as Deputy Vice President, it's an automatic trajectory to become President, as I did in March of 2021.
That's very interesting. I've got throughout, it sounds like you've had a lot of setbacks throughout your career. I mean, you talk about you made redundant 2 times in 2 years. You had to apply 4 times to become the deputy vice president of the law. And I'm assuming coming from a non-legal background, from deputy vice president, then the next step from there is then the president of the Law Society. I'm assuming, right? So you've had your fair share.
Vice President.
Okay.
And then
Right, vice president. But then it's a step you need to, get to before you can get to president of the Law Society where you are now. You've had your fair share of setbacks, I can say. Um, how have you managed to
yes.
overcome those setbacks? Have you ever felt like very, very down? And have you managed to pick yourself up and overcome those?
Well, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I see a sign when I drive past a certain church, and it quotes a passage from the Bible that talks about ships sink not because of, I think I've got this right, not because of the water that gets in them, but the water, that surrounds it. I think I possibly have got that right. But the point is that for me, the lessons is not in how many times I got knocked down, but in how did I get up. The point is, we've all faced obstacles. We've all faced, setbacks in our life. For some of us, it will make us stronger, more determined, more resilient. For others, we will allow it to keep us there. And I was never going to be one of those persons to allow it to define me or to keep me there. So, looking at the 4 attempts that it took me, I didn't listen to people. When people told me, Stephanie, go home and rest, you're embarrassing yourself now. If 3 attempts, you haven't done it, it's not going to happen. When people told me never in our lifetime will we see an ethnic minority, as they were calling it then, become president of the Law Society of England and Wales. When people told me you'll get frustrated with the workers of this building, and people told me, and people told me, and people told me, and it's absolutely amazing, Tevin, how freely people will offer their advice. But just because somebody offers their advice doesn't mean that I have to take it, you have to take it. You have to know which advice to take and which advice to leave well alone. And so when I think back as to some of those times, of course there were tears, of course there were disappointments, but I'm one of these people that I absolutely believe in action. It didn't come to me. This amazing platform, this amazing role did not come to me sat at home gazing. It came to me because I got into action. I believed that I was, and I believe that I am the best person to do this role, because I was just as qualified, just as capable, able as anybody else who'd stepped into this space before. And I also believed in the power of visibility. It is important for me and others to be visible in this space because, as I said to you earlier, we must lift as we climb. But in doing so, we are making that crooked road a little straighter, so that those who will come behind us, whose journey, whose path will be a little bit, smoother and better.
For sure. And yeah, for sure, I really do agree and resonate with what you're saying about the representation. Now you're the president of the Law Society, the first person of color to become the president of the Law Society, which is an amazing achievement in of itself. And it's something that people are going to be looking up and going to be very inspired by. Your journey and your position where you are right now. It's that visible sort of representation that I feel like we need to see a lot more of, not only in law but just across every industry. That visible representation. With the Law Society, can you just touch on now, very briefly, on just essentially who the Law Society are, and maybe what some of your key areas of focus are as president of the Law Society right now?
Absolutely. So the Law Society is the professional body representative body for solicitors. And we represent some 200,000 plus solicitors in the jurisdiction of England and Wales. And we are keen to promote excellence in the profession, to be the voice of solicitors, and to ensure and uphold the rule of law, and ensure that the public as well understand our role as legal practitioners. So, uh, uh, some of my priorities as president, so quite right, I am the 177th, the sixth female, the first black office holder, and the first person of colour to hold this position as president in the Law Society's entire almost 200-year history. So a remarkable achievement, and I'm absolutely, as I say, honoured, privileged to be in this space, and absolutely blessed to be in this space. So my priorities will focus around access to justice. For me, legal rights mean absolutely nothing if you don't know when those rights are being taken away, or indeed you don't even know how to exercise those rights. And far too often, we come across individuals who don't know what their rights are. And so, I would like to see greater emphasis around public legal education, ensuring that our colleagues, our communities understand what their rights are, that they know how to exercise those rights, where to go to enforce those rights, or even indeed exercise those rights. And that they know about the justice system. So for me, about getting law taught in schools. So that we grow up with a greater understanding as we move from childhood to adulthood, that we grow up with a greater understanding of our justice system. Not when we're caught up in it, because for me, that is potentially too late. But, we come to the justice system as a national treasure, revered as a national treasure, like our NHS. Because our justice system is revered around the world. People come to this jurisdiction of England and Wales to litigate because of the independence of our judiciary, the fairness of our courts and the consistency of our judgments. So our citizens should know and learn about the justice system. Equality, diversity, inclusion, and social mobility. All of those areas close to my heart. I absolutely believe in equity. I absolutely believe in equality of opportunity, and that your background, your starting point, should not define where you can go in life. So, in-house, I'm the second in-house solicitor in almost 50 years to occupy this post. We know that colleagues are growing at an exponential rate going in-house from private practice, from firms. So, but I also know that the challenge of being an in-house practitioner is different from those challenges that one faces in private practice in a firm. So, a greater focus on in-house colleagues. Mental health and well-being. Again, mental health and well-being. We've seen the impact that the pandemic has had on on our mental health and well-being in the last almost 2 years. But also before the pandemic, as practitioners, we have at times very stressful jobs, very stressful roles, and so we need to take care of our mental health as we do our physical health, and mindful of it, and the impact on ourselves and others if we don't look after ourselves. And of course, as we Brexit, as we exit, as we've exited the European Union, and thinking about this jurisdiction, and as I say, people come here to litigate, reminding colleagues globally and domestically that this should be a jurisdiction, England and Wales should be a jurisdiction of choice, and we are still open for business. So those are some of my key priority areas that I will focus on as president.
Perfect. Let's touch upon diversity. You mentioned that as one of your key priority areas. In when you were talking about your journey very early on, you spoke quite a bit about you not necessarily knowing or understanding what you needed to do. You didn't know you had to secure a training contract, for example, beforehand. Things like that. Do you feel like first of all, do you feel like there is a massive lack of diversity within the legal profession, and do you feel that maybe that lack of what would you even call it? Maybe that knowledge, that lack of knowledge, I suppose, in the ways in which you should approach a career in law, in the legal system. Do you feel like that plays a role in a lack of diversity?
So, in terms of diversity, what we do know from some of the statistics that we've managed to gather is that 63% of those entering the profession, i.e., at trainee level, are female. And women now make up the majority of practicing solicitors. That's some 52%. We know that 17.5% roughly are from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background. 5% identify from an LGBT plus background, and around just under 16% or so identify with a physical or mental health issue. So in terms of diversity, when you look at Black, Asian, minority ethnic colleagues, we are probably on par with the general population. What we do know is that 23% of partners in some of the top largest firms, have been privately educated, and that's some 7% of against the general population. So we know that there is social mobility, and those who get into the profession and reach the top of the profession is not reflective of the general population. So we know there's work to do. But what the underrepresentation comes in, Tevin, is in the senior parts of the profession. So at the junior entry level, we are very diverse. But when you start to look at the senior parts of the profession, and indeed the judiciary is has this issue as well, we are not seeing diversity. 31% of partners in private practice are female. 8% of partners in firms of 80 partners or more are from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background. And we know that that figure has only increased by 1% since 2014. So the issue is diversity or underrepresentation at senior levels of the profession, as opposed to those who are coming into the profession, or indeed those who are in the profession. And of course, you build in other factors such as progression, such as work allocation, those who will stay in the profession and thrive in the profession, and those numbers start to abate.
For sure. You paint a very startling picture when you put the stats out like that. Especially if there only been a 1% increase since 2014 in diversification at the senior levels. Obviously there's work to be done there. But what I'd like to touch upon as well is, so you've mentioned quite recently about during the pandemic how the general public have seen some encroachments on some of our liberties. Do you mind touching on maybe a few examples or some examples of that, and why that be important for the everyday person to understand?
Well, absolutely. So when we saw the Prime Minister address the nation on the 23rd of March 2020, and he said words to the effect that I'm now giving the British people the following instruction: you must stay at home. Who would have thought, Tevin, that one would have to think twice before stepping foot outside of your own front door, and whether or not to do so you would be breaking the law, or to go and see a loved one, to travel to see a loved one, all those sorts of things that we saw legislation and rules and regulations that were imposed upon us in the name of a public health emergency. Some of those legislation still remains on our books. And some are with the police crime and sentencing courts bill that's currently making its way through Parliament, are being drawn up to ensure that should we go through another pandemic, that we are better placed to deal. So, such as remote juries. We don't currently have remote juries in England. Scotland has it, but not in England. And that is for your listeners, when I speak about remote juries, that is us. Say we were individuals on a jury, we would be, as we are now, in our respective homes, listening to a trial, trying to decide the facts and the guilt or innocence of that individual who is on trial. And we have a number of concerns around that because, to be judged by your peers, to be in the same room as your peers. So, because we know that people, the human social creature aspect of us is that we work by looking into each other's eyes. We pick up a lot of social cues from body language, facial expressions, looking at people. and to suggest that that can be done via a camera, because I don't know, just as you don't know who is in the room with us now. I can see you, you can see me, but can I honestly say there is nobody else in that room with you? Can you honestly say that there is nobody else in this room with me? And so we are concerned around, the aspects of the jury system that may mean that, how do we know that it's that juror who is, the sanctity of the jury system, that that juror is coming to the conclusions by, individually, and by themselves, as opposed to being coached or aided by anybody else. So when I talk about some of the biggest encroachments, it's about our liberties. We were restricted from going outside of the boundaries of our properties, who we could communicate with, and so forth. Who would have thought, Heaven? 5 years ago, if somebody had said, Stephanie, you will have to wear a mask every time you go into a public building, every time you go onto public transport, I would have said, what for? you know. So it's those sorts of things.
Cool, for sure.
Although my mother tells me that she quite likes the notion of wearing a mask because it keeps her warm.
Does get cold in this country, so don't blame her.
It does.
Okay, so I want to reflecting back on your career and in your life in general, actually. Could you tell us about what your describe one of your highest highs and one of your lowest lows?
Hmm. My highest highs and my lowest lows are probably the same, and that is in as much that the 4 attempts it took me to become successfully elected as deputy vice president. As I say, a remarkable space. When I got the call to say that I had done it, but the previous attempts, to say that I hadn't done it. So hence why they are one and the same.
And what advice would you give to somebody that's starting out on their in law?
To never ever give up. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to your future self to keep pushing, because I believe that every single door is open if you push. You persevere until something happens. You push.
Finally, before we move into our quickfire questions, what do you want your legacy to be?
I have said, and I continue to say, that it is my intention to leave this profession more diverse and inclusive than the one I entered. I'm very clear that, it's got to be a shared ambition. It's, with each and every one of us playing our part. Because, many voices make loud noise, but that's how we affect change. So my legacy is a profession that is genuinely accessible.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Okay, great. So let's move into some quickfire questions. Quickfire. So I've got 10 questions here for you. We've got 20 seconds per
All right.
question. So are you good?
Okay.
Good to start?
I'm ready to go.
All right, let's go. Number one, what's your favorite movie?
The color purple for its symbolism of imagery, but mostly because it reminds us to stop and smell the roses.
Perfect. Second, what's your favorite book?
The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale, because it helps you develop a positive attitude. Because I absolutely believe, Tevin, that a positive attitude can truly transform your entire life, and this book speaks to that.
I'll check it out. Thank you. Number three, name a song that you can never get bored of.
Labby's phrase, something inside so strong, because my favorite line is, the higher they build the barriers, or their barriers, the taller I become. The more they refuse to hear my voice, the louder I will sing.
That's great. Number four, if you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what would you pick?
I'm not sure because I'm terribly picky with food. Probably mangoes or something.
Mango is a good.
As you get older, Kevin, you soon learn. Yeah, but as you get older, you soon learn that the things that you could eat and drink before, you can't. So it's it's evolving.
Right, okay. All right. Next question. How do you start your day?
I start my day with a dose of Joel Osteen. Joel Osteen is a tele-evangelist, but I like the way he mixes scripture with positive thinking. So I start off mindfully with that.
Perfect. Next question. Name 3 people that inspire you.
I think Martin Nelson, and Mother Teresa. But there are so many people in my life who've inspired me, and as I say, who've lifted me to get me to where I am today.
Was that 2 people? Wait, Martin Nelson and Teresa. I never heard. Sorry, Mother Teresa.
Mother Teresa.
Okay, 3. So we need one more.
So Martin Luther King,
Yeah.
Nelson Mandela, and Mother Teresa.
Oh, okay.
3, you said?
Yeah.
Yes.
I've got it. I couldn't hear properly. All right, perfect. I got a bit confused there. All right. Next, what's the best advice that you've ever received?
As I say, lots of advice. Some wanted, some unwanted. I think the best advice for me that I've ever received is, is to never give up. Just keep going. That's how things change. Is if we keep going, we stick our head above the parapet and dare to be different, dare to dream.
Perfect. If you were to dedicate the rest of your life to a charitable cause, what would you pick?
Gosh, I think I absolutely believe in a life of service. I would do this job for free, and I hope to continue to do it. But access to justice, public legal education, I absolutely believe in the power of legal rights. And as I say, what's the point of legal rights if you don't know what they are? So, a charitable cause that everybody should be able to exercise their rights.
Perfect. Final 2 questions.
As well as, to be able to eat, to have a house, and so forth. Sorry,
No,
go on.
it's okay. Final 2 questions. What's the kindest thing that somebody has ever done for you?
Lifted me up as they've climbed.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you. And last one. One thing that people don't know about you.
Oh, that's difficult because I think somebody's written my whole life story on Wikipedia. One thing people don't know about me. Gosh, you've got me there. Gosh, I'm not.
Got about 10
You
seconds
probably
left.
should say what's one thing people don't know about you that you're willing to share. I don't know because, as I say, I think my life has become an open book. I don't know. Gosh, I don't know.
Your favorite color?
Because I think that they know everything. Yeah. Well, that's a good one as well because when I was younger, my favorite color was yellow, but now I think it's kind of grey or something.
Oh, that's one thing. You got it. Yeah.
So, yeah, well, true. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, great. So that's that. Yeah, I've really enjoyed speaking with you today, Stephanie. I feel like you've got a very positive attitude about you, that determination, that positivity that you exude, and I definitely felt that as I've spoken with you today. So very much appreciate you speaking with us today. Very much appreciate all the advice, your stories, the laughs, everything that you shared with us today. It's been amazing. To wrap up, do you have any last words, any closing remarks?
Well, my closing remarks is that as I say, well, firstly, thank you very much for reaching out and for interviewing me. I want to say and impress upon everybody who's listening. When I was asked a question at Hustings and I was one of 4, and I was asked the question: if you are successfully elected as Deputy Vice President, how will you promote equality, diversity, and inclusion? And thinking about it, my answer was to be visible, to be a role model. The line "Lift as we climb" was very much relevant in history. For another cause, it remains true and relevant today. There is no point me being in this space if I'm not prepared to be visible, if I'm not prepared to lift as I climb. But I absolutely believe, whose life might I change? Who might I inspire? And that is why we do everything we do, because we absolutely believe in bringing people up behind us. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for having me on your show. Thank you.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Stephanie. If anybody wants to keep up with to date with the Law Society, maybe yourself, what's the best way in which they can do that?
Absolutely. So the Law Society can be found on LinkedIn, on Twitter, Facebook, and other places. I can be found on LinkedIn under i.stephanie.boyce. So please do follow me, and also on Twitter at iStephanie BOYC1. So it's iStephanie Boyce, but no E and the number one instead of the E. So absolutely. And take a look at the Law Society's website, lawsociety.org.uk.
Great, great. All right, that's that. Thank you so much for your time this today, Stephanie, and enjoy, or hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, and that was Stephanie Boyce. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's very, very much appreciated. If you'd like to support us, then please do subscribe and follow us wherever it is you're listening to this right now. And let us know what you thought about this episode, any key takeaways you had. Very inspiring, very determined person. And I'm sure that there's a lot that we can draw from this conversation with Stephanie Boyce. As always, we'll be releasing our new podcast episode next week, Tuesday, and then the YouTube video will follow later on in the week. So if you'd like to see some previews from the upcoming episode, then please do follow us on our social channels and we'll be uploading previews in the coming days. But that's that for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. That was Stephanie Boyce. This is 1000 Voices, and until next week, we're out.